Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 102nd level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage Ryan Turford, and I am joined, as always, by the level 99 elf medic, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing on this lovely, lovely Monday evening, good sir?
I'm doing good. But Ryan, I have to ask you again, are we struggling in this level? Because this is getting out of hand. This is like kind of breaking the game now that
Yeah.
we're beating levels on above us. Do we actually level up after this?
I mean, we've kind of hit the level cap, Garret. I mean, the only way to level up from here is if we were to promote our classes to a different class subset, and then we'd have to level all over again, kind of thing. Kind of like when you hit Prestige in Call of Duty, or like one of those other video games, like Shining Force, Garret. Like,
so we kind of need to do that. We need a this alphametic human archmage stuff. We need a bump up that.
We need to get our advanced classes at some point. We do need to do that. Is an episode, believe it or not, folks at home. That is an episode that Garret and I pitched before, where we would do kind of like our own like RPG campaign, which would of course be Garret and Ryan kind of get their brand new classes essentially.
That would be legit.
We need to do that at some point, Garret. But that's talk for off the podcast.
Another time.
Yes.
Another time.
Exactly, because this show's gonna be long enough already. So let's clear the dungeon and get to that raid boss as quick as possible. So folks at home, if you want to support the show, there's a number of awesome ways to do it. Number one, if you're watching the live stream right meow over at youtube.com/carpoolgaming, or if you're watching the video on demand later, don't forget to like the video, subscribe if you haven't hit that subscribe button already, and let us know in the comments below what your favorite games from Mistwalker are. Also, if you remember that Mistwalker was a thing. Because I mean, they still make games, but it's just one of those things where, yes, we'll get into that, Garret. But it's one of those things where most people don't think of that as a big RPG studio nowadays. But also, of course, hit that notification bell to be notified whenever we go live or whenever we put up new videos on the channel, like the plethora of shorts that are going on this channel, Garret. Because there's so many shorts, many shorts going on.
So many shorts. I want to break right here, Ryan, and I see your Starfield Xbox controller. It looks so good.
It's very shiny. In fact, let me go get it.
I hate you.
Look how cool this controller is, Garret.
It's bigger. Closer up front in the camera. I like the translucent triggers, the rainbow over the Xbox logo. They really did well with the style of that control and just the style of Starfield in general. They nailed it. They freaking nailed it. Anyways,
no, and as soon as I saw that controller, Garret, I knew I had to have it. In fact, it's one of two Xbox Series controllers that are the fancy controllers. The only other one I have is the Space Jam one. That of course is the Toon Squad one as well. But that was like you couldn't even buy that in the store kind of thing.
I got the custom one, so this was made last year for me, and I have a little Bland, was it called G Bland exclusive on it. I really enjoy it. Yeah, I really enjoy it. So, but
Star Athena asks, will the controller stay in the box? I mean, so here's the thing, Star Athena. Sure. I'm actually going to be moving at the beginning of February. So as a result, anything that I currently don't have out of the box, it's not coming out of the box unless I need to use it for some reason. So it's one of those things where I'm going to at least keep the box around, even if I use the controller in the meantime. But it's going to kind of stay in the box until at least.
But you need to use the controller on September 8th or whenever it releases.
September 1st, because we'll have that early access. We'll have that early access, Garret. It's almost. It's a little over a month away. Yes. Sean Capri, of course, and I, of course, are ride and die with our watches, our Starfield watches that'll be coming in that day. So
freaking nerds.
It's good. It's going to be a magical day.
Space nerds. I bet that watch works in space.
It probably does, actually.
Yeah.
It probably does. Also, if you're listening on audio feeds, don't forget to hit this with that subscribe button as well. And also rate us if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Also, if you want one big audio feed with all the Carpool Gaming content or some exclusive content, you can head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Carpool Gaming. Throw a little tip in the old tip jar, and out comes content, including the upcoming Pants Patreon podcast for Patrons podcast. Because Garret, of course, a couple of weeks ago. And then Matt was this week. And my turn's coming up next. So if you have questions for me, If you're at the $1 level or above on Patreon, you can go ahead and ask you anything kind of questions for me on the Patreon.
Literally any question.
Yes.
Like,
I already have
it doesn't matter.
Nagachaka about the Resident Evil, the new movie that's coming out, the new CG Resident Evil.
Oh, there's a new CG.
There's always a new CG Resident Evil movie. That's the thing.
Okay.
They're kind of like the DC animated movies, Garrett, where they just kind of never end. And they just
okay. Well, yeah, they're like low budget enough. They just, produce enough persistence and of audience or whatever that make another one.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I may need to watch that in anticipation for Nagachaka's question because it's interesting. But last thing I want to shout out, Garrett, before we get into the show proper, we don't normally tee up what's coming up on the following episode of RPG Cave.
Yes.
But next week we have a pretty special episode coming up, which is why I want to kind of tee it up ahead of time because I know people are going to have questions about this. People have been asking for us to cover this particular topic. And I want people to get their questions ready and be prepared for the questions posed.
Be prepared
pretty soon. But next week on the show, we will be talking about Final Fantasy 16. We will have a whole show devoted to Final Fantasy 16, including spoilers. So if you have spoiler questions, I will put up a specific post to ask spoiler questions because there's a specific way I want people to submit those. So then that way other people in the community are not spoiled by the questions. So look out for that. Over the weekend is when I'm going to kind of put that up. So make sure to kind of think about what questions you want to ask or what kind of discussion you want Garrett and I have about Final Fantasy 16. But that's going to be next week's show is Final Fantasy 16. And then, of course, last thing I want to promote before we get into it. I know I said that thing was the last thing, but I promise
now this is the second. This is the second last thing.
Well, because you reminded me with the controllers, Garrett, because I didn't write this down. But I want to at least make sure to promote this. So Xbox Drive 300, of course, happened on Wednesday. It was a really magical episode. It was 5 hours and 20 minutes of Xbox Drive. So you make sure
20 extra minutes. You love the community.
I know.
Apparently. Oh, wow.
So we still have our contest going on for Xbox Drive 300. We are currently giving away an Xbox Design Labs Elite controller. With all the accessories that is, of course, designed in the style of Xbox Drive 300. We are also giving away 300 ID at Xbox games to one lucky winner.
So many.
We also have a bunch of Game Pass codes. So the entries are still open for that. I believe we're running the contest till the end of the month. So the way you enter is, of course, if you haven't entered already, of course, make sure to rate the Xbox Drive on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and send myself or Sean Capri a screenshot saying that you did so. We'll add you to the giveaway list, and then we'll be drawing winners at the end of the month for this exclusive controller. Also, we have a shirt over on our website, carpoolgaming.com, to celebrate Xbox Drive 300. And if you buy a shirt, you get 3 additional entries as well into the contest. Just make sure, of course, you send us like a screenshot saying you bought the shirt, or if you're wearing the shirt, that counts too if you send us a picture of that. So,
nice. But guess what, Ryan?
What, Garrett?
Mine's in the mail. I can't wait.
Boy. It's a really good shirt. Designed by Seth Sturgill. So
nice.
Yeah. I haven't gotten mine yet either, but I did order mine as well. Of course, I'm precluded from winning anything, Garrett, but at the very least, I will have my Xbox Drive 300 t-shirt to celebrate 300 episodes of the Xbox Drive. But enough about all that stuff, all that gobbledygook. That was all in the past, Garrett, because it's time
all in the past
to read from the sacred texts as we talk more about the past. So tonight's an interesting episode. This is a topic, actually, Garrett, that was submitted by our community multiple times for us to talk about, but it's taken a little while for us to get here because you and I really aren't the two experts, I would say, on the games from this particular developer. But I thought it was an interesting story and something that would be interesting for us to discuss, that when it came time to figure out topics for this week, I thought this would be an interesting idea to go with. So we're going to talk about Mistwalker. This is the studio created by Hinenobu Sakaguchi, who, of course, is the creator of Final Fantasy, going all the way back to the original.
That's
Final
crazy,
Fantasy.
man.
Yeah. So when he split off from Square Enix, he kind of started his own thing with Mistwalker. And of course, we have fun facts, Garrett. Believe it or not,
lots of fun facts.
The return of fun facts is finally
Get ready, ladies and gentlemen. Here's your encyclopedia.
Yeah. So feel free to sit back, ladies and gentlemen, grab your popcorn and snacks, It's time to get into some fun facts. Garrett, you can relax too for a little bit. So
sounds good.
First up, the story of Mistwalker, of course, starts with the story of Hinonobu Sakaguchi himself. Sakaguchi-san is the creator of Final Fantasy, as I mentioned, and he served on as the director of the first 5 Final Fantasy games. So he basically oversaw everything with Final Fantasy, and he was the Final Fantasy guy for the longest time. Mm-hmm. But then he when it was time to come up with Final Fantasy VI, he shifted to more of a producer / writing role because he wanted to kind of bring someone else in to kind of lead the vision of Final Fantasy. But he was actually the writer and the producer on both Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII, which are 2 of the games with the strongest stories in the Final Fantasy series, if I might dare to say so myself. But he also worked on the same role on Mario RPG, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy Tactics, and of course, Ryan Turford's personal favorite, Parasite Eve, because of course.
This dude's a legend. Yeah. Hearing all this, that's a lot of famous Square Enix RPGs.
Those are just the ones I wanted to highlight too, Garrett. There's more. There's a giant list. If you look up Sakaguchi-san, like again, to your point, Garrett, he's an industry legend. He basically had his hands in pretty much everything Square Enix put out after Final Fantasy came out. Basically until he left the company in 2003, he pretty much had his hands on everything. Which is just crazy to think about. Because again, we don't, other than, Miyamoto, we don't really see a lot of other people in companies, like Japanese companies or North American companies, that have their hands on so much stuff or have that much creative control over things. So Sakaguchi, again, really interesting character and I would love for people to kind of learn more. In fact, maybe that's a tease for a future episode that I have planned later this year.
Ooh.
Wink, wink. But in 2001, there was this movie that came out, Garrett. I don't know if you've heard it, called Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, which did not do well at the theaters, but cost a lot of money to make. So between that and Sakaguchi-san basically being assigned to an executive producer role in 1999, which really pulled him away from making video games, because he basically described the executive producer role that he had as a quote-unquote do nothing job. That's it. That's his words, not mine. Where he talks about it in interviews, is like he was basically just doing paperwork, or he was just hanging out in Hawaii because he lives in Hawaii. So he was just hanging out there, just kind of doing nothing and just getting paid the big bucks. And his name was at the end of every Square Enix game after 1999 until 2003 as the executive producer role, but he didn't really have his hand on any of those games that were developed during that time.
Was like Final Fantasy X came out around that time as well. Okay.
Yep. He had nothing to do with Final Fantasy X. Or
good. That makes sense.
Same with its sequel, which was the last game that he had his name on at Square Enix when he left the company in 2003 was Final Fantasy X-2, of course, the greatest of all the Final Fantasy games, Garrett. Exactly. But the main reason why he talks about this, he wanted to leave the company, is like the company itself, like Square Enix at the time wasn't trending in the right direction financially because of Spirits Within, combined with the fact that he wasn't allowed basically to work on any video games, and he wanted to make video games. Like that was his whole shtick. So he was like, well, I think I'm gonna part ways with Square Enix. Like that was the reason he left the company. He could have just collected dollars until he retired, basically, at that point, and led a pretty comfortable life. But he wanted to continue to make games. So, hats off to him. In fact, around the same time, you actually saw a bunch of higher ups in Square Enix kind of doing the same thing. It's one of the reasons why we had a bunch of Japanese role-playing developers kind of spring up around the time. In fact, this ties into Monolith Soft as well, because that's how Monolith Soft first formed. Because all those higher ups at Monolith Soft also worked at Square, and also kind of had similar situations happen with Sakaguchi-san with them. So that's why they all kind of decided to leave the company around the same time. And that's when you also started to see, people like Nomura starting to kind of rise the ranks of Square Enix at the time. But yeah, it was just a really interesting time. So Mistwalker, of course, was founded in July of 2004 with Sakaguchi at the helm. What's interesting about Mistwalker, Garrett, I don't know if you knew this, is even though technically It's founded by a Japanese founder. The headquarters is not in Japan. It's in Hawaii. So it's in the United States.
US.
Yeah.
It's a US-based company. Interesting.
It's technically a US-based company. And there's partial reasons for that because, of course, their first game, Blue Dragon, which we'll talk about more in detail in just a few seconds, was actually talked about with the possibility of coming to PlayStation 3, but it was also decided that it will become an Xbox exclusive, which was unheard of at the time because at the time that the 360 was coming out, there were no Japanese exclusives besides Otogi and Otogi 2 and a handful of other games at that point. So Japanese RPGs just in general were very few and far between on Xbox. But the reason why they actually made this decision was actually twofold. Number one, there was some beef between Sakaguchi-san and Sony PlayStation head Ken Kutaragi at the time over a bunch of different issues. But then also Microsoft said, hey, we know that you want to get your studio started and we want to invest in Japanese style games. So we'll actually help you found the studio. So Microsoft actually put a bunch of money towards just the founding of Mistwalker in general. So that's part of the reason why there were multiple Xbox exclusives that came out of it, was because of the fact that Microsoft actually were kind of like co-founders of the studio when it first founded, which is just an interesting thing.
Yeah, Microsoft really was into, at least at that time, trying to get the Japanese kind of flavor going in the market. And they got other games to be Xbox exclusive, which was actually kind of cool for them to approach that way, for sure.
Yeah, and these games still haven't come to other consoles or PC. So I mean,
it's cut off.
They are on Xbox only, but luckily we can go back and actually replay all these now. Through the power of back compat, because they're all backwards compatible at this time. Because Microsoft published all those games, which is awesome. So they're all first party games, which is cool.
Ryan, I just want to stop you right here. I just want to say that I went to Hawaii. Earlier this year, I actually went to Honolulu and I looked up Mistwalker's address, and I'm pretty sure I've walked through this building like multiple times. So their address is in Waikiki, which is a very touristy area of Honolulu.
Yeah.
So man, I think that's a mall. I think they're literally in a mall or something like that.
Well, they have a very small studio. One of the things I was going to bring up is currently they have 15 employees. It's like they don't have a lot of people that work there. So I mean, they don't have like a very big building. They used to, when the studio first founded, there was they had a bigger building because they were working on bigger games. But now that they've transitioned away from making larger games, that's the main reason why the studio itself just doesn't. It can be in a mall or above a mall because realistically, there's only a handful of people that actually still work there.
Yeah, interesting.
Like we see that with a bunch of mobile developers here in Toronto, actually. Like there's a bunch of them in malls or other places like that.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so that's kind of, I was about to actually transition away from fun facts anyways, because we'll talk about these on kind of like an individual game basis. And again, we're not going to dive deep with every single Mistwalker game, of course, but I've got some highlights of games. And of course, we'll talk about where the company is kind of going now. But of course, the one thing I want to talk about real quick before we get into Blue Dragon is just setting the stage once again, because kind of getting started with Xbox is how I kind of labeled this on the doc, where at the time there was a lot of hype for Blue Dragon, for Lost Odyssey, because around the time that the Xbox 360 was announced, Microsoft announced all these games around that was coming out. And I remember, like, as someone who likes Japanese role-playing games and someone who was like very in on Xbox with the original Xbox, like I was like humming and hawing as to like, okay, do I maybe go PlayStation 3 next console generation, or do I go Xbox 360? And the combination of those games and then Mass Effect also coming to console, like I was kind of all in on Xbox 360. Like there was so much hype for these games, both Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey at E3 2004, where these were actually originally announced.
Really? E3 2004 is when they announce both titles?
They announced both. The only trailer we kind of had was Blue Dragon at the time.
Yeah, because it was earlier.
Because it came out in 2006. Lost Odyssey came out a year later. But but it's one of those things where like we saw Lost Odyssey the following year at E3, but they wanted to announce, hey, we've got a bunch of games coming please be excited was kind of the gist of the original announcement. But yeah, at the time I remember this being like a huge deal for Xbox.
For sure.
And to your point, Garrett, like that was them trying to, get in bed with Japanese gamers. Whereas I know you probably weren't even really paying attention to Xbox at the time, right?
Well, I had a 360 from launch,
right.
2005. But I was not into Japanese role-playing games until way later.
Yeah.
Until, I mean, like I was playing Pokemon, but and then I dabbled in Dragon Quest. I think it was 10, something like that on the DS. And then I didn't really get into JRPGs till Persona 4 Golden in 2014. So this was way past my time, or way before my time, that I was into it. But I remember getting these with Games with Gold. And that's how I got these.
100%.
Games.
Like if anyone has been at all in the Xbox ecosystem with Games with Gold or a number of different promotions, because they also did other promotions to give these games away for free.
Yeah.
Like Lost Odyssey, I think, was free for an entire year. Where if you just
claimed
it once, you just had it. You just had it at that point.
But now there's a price tag on it.
Now there's actually a price tag of $5. So you have to pay the $5 fee if you want to play Blue Dragon or Lost Odyssey. But no. So I just had to, of course, emphasize the fact that it was a big deal for the Xbox community. But I knew, Garrett, like you at the time, because you told me your story before about getting into RPGs. It makes sense that you probably wouldn't pay attention to these. But let's talk about the first game, Blue Dragon, because again, this was one I was excited about before it came out, and then we had a demo coming out for Blue Dragon that came out before the game came out, and it made me way less excited for the game because for folks that haven't played it, first of all, the art is done by Akira Toriyama, famous for Dragon Ball, but also the Dragon Quest series. And of course, Sakaguchi-san wanted to work with Toriyama because of the connection with Chrono Trigger. So that was kind of the reason why he wanted to bring Toriyama in for, Blue Dragon specifically. And likewise, there's another manga artist that Sakaguchi-san wanted to work with, but that was for Lost Odyssey. That was with the manga artist who did Slam Dunk, which was this basketball anime. That I forgot the name of. He designed all the characters though for Lost Odyssey. But Blue Dragon very much was almost like what if Sakaguchi-san could make a Dragon Quest game, that was what he wanted to make Blue Dragon kind of be. But they also tried to turn Blue Dragon, Garrett, into this big like IP, this big media franchise that would cross over not just games but also anime and merchandise and be this big deal like that. They were trying
Pokemon.
They were trying to position it to be, or just like the next Dragon Quest or the next Final Fantasy is what they kind of wanted it to be. And while it didn't exactly do that, Blue Dragon actually got multiple sequels. So it actually, continued success. It also had multiple anime and manga series as well. And it really kind of, again, for about 4 or 5 years, it was a big deal, I guess. Or it was a deal, at least in Japan. It was definitely more popular in Japan than it ever was here in North America.
Yeah. It was definitely appealing to more of the Japanese audience. I'm looking at the Metacritic was a 79. At the time. So
but most of that, good. Garrett, if you go read those reviews, it's actually because of performance problems on the Xbox 360.
On the 360 itself.
Like really bad frame rates. Like sometimes like you'd be walking around the environment and it'd go like sub 10 frames per second.
Goodness.
Yeah, like it was not a well optimized game, which was surprising for a lot of people because it was an exclusive and it was a first party Microsoft game.
It's like within like 1 year after launch of the 360. Because Skyrim can play on 360 pretty nicely. So
well, I mean, it plays way better on there than PS3, Garrett.
Yeah. So
but it was a very traditional role-playing game where you played as 5 characters in your party, but they had the ability to summon these shadow monsters, which of course the main characters was a blue dragon, but you also had blue other creatures as well, and they kind of helped you in the combat and helped you to cast spells and do all kinds of different moves. But it was like a very and this is part of the reason why like I was less excited after playing the demo for the game, but like the game was just very slow to get going, kind of like Dragon Quest, where eventually 20 hours in it can get pretty fun, but that 20 hour
that
journey
sound like
is
fun. Hey
yeah.
guys, 20 hours and I promise you, it gets the investment of 20 hours. It's gonna be a little bit more worth it. That
Yeah.
sounds like fun.
It was a big slog to get into, and it was a really long game as well. Like we're talking like 50 to 60 hours to finish it, which again, at nowadays doesn't sound like a long game when you compare it to something like Persona 5.
That's
but
true.
back then when it came out, like for RPGs, that was really long.
Yeah, that's like unheard of.
And the best part is, Garrett, that's 50, 60 hours, no side quests. It's completely linear.
No, I don't like that. I don't like that at all.
Yes. And that was, of course, another complaint about the game when it came out. Besides the performance issues, the other number one complaint was just there wasn't a lot to do outside of the main story. So just it was super long, and it almost felt like some of the main story felt like filler. But instead of the filler being relegated to side quests, it was just the main story, which just is more of a feel bad.
I don't like that. I don't like that. So I looked up how long to beat. So here you go. Main story, 45 and a half hours. Main plus sides, 57 hours. Completionist, 98 hours.
It's fine. It's fine, Garrett. You know, you can do that in an afternoon, right?
Oh my gosh. That's like Dragon Quest 11 energy going on.
But again, that's what they were going for, though. They were going for Dragon Quest. Like that was the goal with this game. And they again, I feel like they succeeded in making a Dragon Quest game. It's just one of those things where at the time, you know, Dragon Quest was not popular in North America at all. Like it was a very, very niche series. It was so much more popular in Japan, which again explains why Blue Dragon caught on way more in Japan than it ever did in North America. But because we just were not like the audience for this.
And it released earlier in Japan too. It released in December 2000. That's the most interesting thing. This is an Xbox 360 exclusive, and they decided to release it, I mean, 6 to 8 months earlier in Japan compared to the US. So they knew their target audience for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Like that,
it was a console seller in the Japanese market.
Yeah, exactly. Like this was very much like the trying to get this out as close to launch as possible in Japan specifically to get people to buy Xbox consoles. Like it made perfect sense for that reason. But again, like I mentioned, it got 2 sequels, both on the Nintendo DS, Garrett. So not on Xbox, but
that's what I'm talking about.
2 games published by Microsoft on the DS, of course.
That's a weird thing. Sequels. Okay, it works.
Weird to think about when you think about it, but yeah. Oh no, Blue Dragon, it's fine, but it's one of those games that, like, you know, people always reference when talking about the history of Microsoft. You know, try buddying up with Japanese studios, but it's not a game that people actually talk about the game that often when they were.
Yeah, so the sequels were not made by Mistwalker at all. They were definitely different. And even the publisher was different. This is so interesting. I mean, it's a Microsoft IP, so I'm sure they'd still get some money out of it. And Nintendo DS was insanely popular, like insanely popular at the time. It was 2009. This is interesting to hear that there's sequels from this game.
Well, especially again, when you consider the target audience for Blue Dragon was Japan specifically, that makes perfect sense as to why they would be DS games. Right?
Like, definitely.
If they weren't going to be Xbox 360 games
in Japan,
you may as well make them on the DS if you're not going to do the 360 versions for sure.
Yeah.
But of course, the other project we heard about that came out 2007. This is a game that everyone was very hyped about after seeing a demonstration of this game in Engine in 2005 was Lost Odyssey. And a lot of people refer to this as the true Final Fantasy 13, or even I would say it's more accurate to say the true kind of like Final Fantasy 11 in a lot of ways.
I see.
Because Final Fantasy 10 was really the end of the turn-based Final Fantasy saga.
It really was, yeah.
Because 11 was an MMO, and then 12 was kind of like weird. An MMO offline, and then 13 was turn-based, but you can only control one character. And then 14 was an MMO, and 15 and 16 are just action games. So in a lot of ways, it really is the true Final Fantasy 11, where it was also a very traditional turn-based role-playing game, which, believe it or not, Garrett, going back and looking at old reviews for Lost Odyssey, so many people dinged the score for Lost Odyssey because it was a traditional role-playing game where people were kind of were fed up with it, because a lot of people were like, well, in a year that Mass Effect came out, like,
and
why would we go?
Bioshock.
What? Yeah, and but I mean, just RPGs specifically though, Garrett. Like in a year that Mass Effect came out, like why would we want to go back to old traditional role-playing games like this one? Was kind of the thought process for a lot of reviews.
Okay.
For Lost Odyssey, because if you go back and look at the Metacritic for Lost Odyssey, I mean, it's not terrible. Like, it's actually pretty good. But like, it's a 78, but it's also not as high as you would expect it to be, considering how often you hear people talking about how good Lost Odyssey is of a game.
I hear it's a gem, like an Xbox 360 Japanese role-playing game gem that PlayStation will never get.
100%. It also, fun fact, if you play this on an original Xbox 360, Garrett, number one, this game comes on 3 discs, not 1, not 2, but 3 discs, which was kind of unheard of at the time. But number 2, there's 30-second load times anytime you do anything, whether it's opening the menu, going through doors, doing a whole bunch of other things, which was also a major critique in reviews, was just the ability to interact with the game was just kind of such a slog in that way.
Interesting.
And also had some performance issues as well, because this was, I wouldn't say it's an early Unreal Engine 3 game, but you can definitely tell like they didn't have like the firmest grasp on Unreal Engine 3 at the time, which was kind of new tech.
I want to correct you on this. I think Blue Dragon was 3 discs, and then Lost Odyssey was 4.
Oh.
Well, yeah, I see the game's content was large enough that it was shipped on 4 dual layer DVD discs.
Okay.
And I remember seeing it when I was playing a little bit earlier today just to get familiar with it. There was an achievement of saying complete disc 4. Okay. It's a rare achievement. That's the funny part.
Well, thank you for correcting me, Garrett, because that would have looked really silly for me, just because I'd forgot that was an achievement, and I've only ever had the digital version of this game.
Yeah, so. maybe it had some 3 discs, maybe in some versions, but when I see on Wikipedia, it's saying 4 dual layer DVD discs. Yeah. Interesting.
So then I have to ask you about this, Garrett, because I saw a certain someone was playing this game earlier tonight.
Oh yeah.
So first of all, did you play it when it came out, or like this tonight was your first time playing it?
So, well, I did get it with Games with Gold, or when I think
I was gonna say everyone got it when it was Games with Gold, or when it was free for that 1 year that it was free for, that you could just claim it.
Yeah, so I did play it, like, I would say at the time when I got it, for like maybe 4 hours or something like that, and of course I just kind of dropped it and just like did other things. So I wanted to like get back and just play a little bit today, just to remind myself what this kind of looked like. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is Final Fantasy X. I felt there's a lot of Final Fantasy X energy in this game, and not in terms of like the story or whatever, but it's more just graphically and how the game was set up, like turn-based and everything. It was very
even down to like the turn-based order that you can see on the screen, and the way that it's even laid out. It looks like Final Fantasy X. The fonts look similar to Final Fantasy X, and so is the menus. Like, it's kind of like the spiritual successor to Final Fantasy X, if people have never played it. Again, this is a game that I've also not really dove into too much. It's one of those games that's always on the backlog of, maybe I'll get to this game eventually and, start it from the beginning and kind of play all the way through Lost Odyssey, because people keep telling me I should do that, and I haven't done that yet. Now that it actually runs well, because that's one of the nice things about, playing it on 1X or Series X, is it did get X enhancements.
Yes, it did.
And it improves the load times, fixes a lot of the performance stuff that was kind of problematic with the original release. So I should. Ribo in the chat agrees. He's like, Ryan, you should do that at some point. So
I should do that too.
Yeah, but either way, really, really cool game. Again, it's weird to think about the fact that it's an Xbox exclusive, Garrett, when you look at this game.
It's their Final Fantasy, and Xbox doesn't have anything like that now, which is sad. Like they don't have any really JRPG developers in their wheelhouse. They may have a Game Pass game, and well, okay, sure, Persona's in there, but like that's available everywhere. They don't have a Final Fantasy like exclusive game that will grab a Japanese market. And I don't. Maybe they won't ever will. Maybe they accept that and they'll just go the Game Pass route, which
Yeah,
is fine.
because it's very hard to justify for a Japanese
Yeah.
developer only putting their game on Xbox. It's one thing to sign like a marketing agreement with Xbox, because we've seen, Bandai Namco do that a bunch with Scarlet Nexus and Tales of Arise as examples. But as far as putting their games only on Xbox, that's just too much of a hard sell, I think, now. Especially when you look at the console marketing, not even just in Japan, but also just worldwide. Like Sony, like PlayStation 5 is 2-1, and then Switch like dwarfs the Xbox numbers at this point. So yeah, it's unfortunately not a possible thing. But yeah, this is when Xbox was all in on trying to win over Japanese developers. But what's interesting is then what followed after Lost Odyssey was, that neither one of these games really sold that well in North America, and Xbox wasn't really like seeing the the selling rate of the console increase really in Japan, where they were selling maybe 200 Xboxes a week in Japan. So that's when the company decided to kind of change direction and kind of cede that Japanese market to Sony at that point. So they of course stopped funding Mistwalker games. So that's when Mistwalker of course started looking for publishers, and it turns out they worked out a deal to bring games to Nintendo consoles, because their next game, and this was actually, believe it or not, their final console game. Their final console game is The Last Story on the Wii. Of course, on stream, Garrett's chuckling a bit because I'm showing off my collector's edition copy of The Last Story. It comes with a book, all kinds of cool stuff.
Did you get that on release, or did you get that later?
I got this on release, but I've never really played it. So it's kind of been sitting here. It even comes with this cool slipcover, but it just doesn't like to stay on. So.
What year is that?
2011. So
11. Wow.
Yeah.
Way later.
Now it came out earlier on the Wii in Japan. Because this was part of those 3 games, Garrett.
The 3 games, yes.
The Project Rainfall, I believe what it's called, where there was the movement in North America to bring these games to North America. Of course, Xenoblade Chronicles, the other big game that was in there, and Pandora's Tower was the third one. Those were 3 Japanese three Japanese games that were really highly regarded in Japan, but just never made their way to North America. So people petitioned until finally they're like, all right, we'll release these in very limited quantities here in North America. And the only one that really sold super, super well was Xenoblade Chronicles. Like, they all sold out. All 3 of those games sold out through their kind of initial run. But Xenoblade Chronicles was the only one that kind of became like a big hit, because they had to keep I think they threw out like 4 or 5 waves to GameStop with different waves of more and more copies of Xenoblade Chronicles to just get the game out there.
Yeah.
Because the demand was super high for that game. But The Last Story is like a cool action RPG with some tactical elements. And it's a lot of fun. So again, they tried to go in a different direction because they wanted to go less traditional with The Last Story. The storyline itself, very traditional JRPG kind of story about friendship. But the gameplay itself was very, very different from anything that Sakaguchi-san had ever worked on before. Where again, there were stealth elements where if you got behind the enemy, you could actually deal extra damage, or you had different party members with different abilities. Like you had like a tank in your party that could kind of like steer the enemies away from your other allies while they focused on using different abilities. And this was actually a really cool game. Again, it's like a game I've dabbled with, but I've never really finished or never really stuck through. Again, this was actually on my tournament bracket, Garrett, for my game to play next, but it failed in the comparison of 24 the game, which was too strong a competitor to defeat the Last Story. But this is one I've always really been interested in going back to as well, kind of like Lost Odyssey, and giving another chance to, because this game reviewed really, really well. And it's a game that I would love to play more of. But did you ever
want to hear too? The Last Story.
I was gonna say, I didn't know what you had heard about Last Story, Garrett.
I mean, I was not into JRPG. I played Xenoblade Chronicles like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
On the Switch. So I did not know much when I had my Wii I really had Twilight Princess and Super Smash Brothers on the Wii. That's pretty much
Well, the
it.
thing about the Wii, Garrett, you have to remember, like, kind of like the Xbox 360, it wasn't known for RPGs on the Wii. Like,
it really wasn't. Yeah.
Our RPGs were not the popular game genre. It was party games or sports games and things like that, or Nintendo first party games. Like,
Yeah.
other than the Tales of Symphonia sequel and the 3 RPGs we talked about.
There's not much.
And then there's Sakura Wars. That we finally got that first North American Sakura Wars game. Besides those, I can't think of any other RPGs on the Wii.
Like, maybe Japanese, like very focused RPGs or Japanese released only RPGs. That makes sense, but like for sure the DS was just dominating that from 2000, what was it, 2004 or 5 or whatever, all the way to 2013 when not 13, 11, when the 3DS came out. Yeah, that thing was pretty dominant. It was like the most sold console ever. Having so many RPGs on that thing is crazy.
DS was king of the hill at the time. Like, even the PlayStation 3, even though it had the most RPGs at the time, it was still not even a huge RPG machine either. Like, it's not one that people look back on all these RPGs on the PS3. There were definitely a lot more than the other two consoles, but it was mostly the handhelds at the time. And even PSP had a ton of RPGs on it too. Like, that it wasn't even just the DS. And then that carried over even with 3DS and Vita.
That's true.
With a lot as well. But
yeah.
But Garrett, we got to talk about what happened after the last story.
Yeah,
because with multiple games under their belt, Mistwalker decided to pivot away from larger games because they weren't really seeing like a lot of money in the environment. And Sakaguchi-san kind of wanted to work on smaller experiences. He didn't want to work on big grandiose games anymore because he had been doing that for 30 years at that point, basically. So he kind of wanted to do something really different, and they decided, of course, to focus as a studio on mobile devices and having smaller experience on mobile devices, starting with 2012's release of Party Wave, Garrett, which is a surfing game for your phone by the creator of Final Fantasy, because that's a game that exists. Because of course it does.
Oh boy. That's rough, man.
Yeah.
That's so rough.
Yeah, they had that. They had they tried a bunch of different. They had like a tower defense game. They tried like a bunch of different genres of games on your phone until eventually they came back to RPGs with 2014's Terra Battle, which actually got not one but 2 sequels, because there was a Terra Battle 2 and then a Terra Battle Tactics game as well. So there were 2 games there. And of course, they played it up in the marketing big time, Garrett. The RPG on your phone created by the maker of Final Fantasy. And people were all excited about Terra Battle. I don't think anyone in North America was excited for Terra Battle, but that was a thing in Japan. People were excited for Terra Battle.
Good for them.
And then that kind of leads us to the current game with their latest game. The studio's latest game came out in 2021, Garrett. So 2 years ago.
Yeah.
With Fantasian on Apple Arcade was where that came out. And
come on.
At this time, still not on other consoles. And apparently it was one of the best role-playing games of 2021, Garrett.
I heard it's so good.
Yeah.
Why is this? You can literally port this thing to Switch.
Yeah.
Like, make it so easy to just have it for
like console. I don't even have an Apple device to play this on.
I don't have an Apple device at all. I cannot play this game at all.
So
sorry, Arden.
No, I know.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So that's like their newest game is Fantasian, and they still haven't really announced. We know that they have another game in development, but we don't know what that's going to be, whether it's Fantasian 2 or something else. I imagine it's another mobile game. Like, people, because there are people out there, Garrett. I don't know if you've seen them on Reddit, who are like, Mistwalker's going to come back one day to consoles, you guys, and they're going to make this big role-playing games again, even though there's 15 people working at that studio now. There's no way they're ever coming back from mobile phones, I think.
I just want them to port Fantasia first. Like, I think it's totally fine. By the way, these mobile games are not free to play games, as I recall, right?
Like, you got to buy them all. Yeah.
You got to buy them. And so they're not cash grabs or anything like that. they're easily marketable on like the Switch store or
Or
the
PC,
PlayStation
for
or
God's
PC,
sake.
or put it on stupid Steam. Like, no joke. Like,
Yeah.
you could sell it for $10 or whatever you want. It'll be very easy for them to do.
Yeah.
I don't know what's the deal here,
Yeah.
actually. I don't know what
Especially
to
with
play.
Fantasian in particular. I'm very surprised that never came to PC at this point. I
Yeah.
had to look it up to make sure that I wasn't
Yeah, no, it's
imagining
only
something.
on iOS, and it was like an Apple Arcade type of flagship, right? Like
Yeah.
one of the
It,
big
it was one of
games.
those games, like one of the other ones was Shantae and the Seven Sirens. They were both came out
Yeah,
around the same
that's
time,
true.
and were kind of like big deals in quotations for Apple
Yeah.
Arcade.
I don't want to say okay, I'm not knocking an Apple device or Apple Arcade too. I'm just saying this game needs to be on other platforms that can be very portable, and I can just pay my money there. Like,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
heck, if they were, I think it would actually be a big help if they were on Android.
it would be a huge help. I have an Android phone, and
Yeah.
that's what I'm just gonna keep
Same.
because I'm comfortable with that device. I don't know. They got well. It's been 2 years, so
Yeah.
I doubt that they're gonna do
I was
anything
gonna
with
say
it.
they haven't announced support for any other console, so I don't think it's coming to anything else.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's where Mistwalker is now. It's interesting to think about kind of where they started versus where they're kind of heading at this point. Because I know, again, like I never would have thought that this is
Hmm.
kind of thing, but this is something that could have happened with any number of developers out there. Like especially with like Monolith Soft, like I could have seen them going on like a similar track at some point if like Xenoblade didn't do as well with the Wii version, like with the North American sales as an example. Like I
Hmm. Hmm.
could have seen them maybe get spin off in that direction, or any number of developers out there.
Hmm.
But it's just an interesting story. And again, like Sakaguchi-san, again, there's some really interesting history there that I'm not going to go into here because maybe at some point later this year we might end up doing the early years of Final Fantasy where we talk about him more.
Yeah.
So I kind of want
Yeah.
to save that chat for later. But
Cool.
overall, Garrett, what do you think about Mistwalker just in general? What are your final thoughts on tonight's conversation
It
about
is
Mistwalker?
certainly a story. You don't hear much of smaller Japanese game developers go through this route, especially the turn to mobile
Mhm.
only devices. It makes sense, but personally to me, it doesn't really make sense to just only do mobile if you're doing an a la carte based or subscription based system without any kind of free to play mobile kind of tropes or devices on those games. Like you can easily port those. But yeah, overall, interesting to hear the split from Square Enix
Mhm.
and going over to the Xbox side. That's
Yep.
and being in Hawaii, that certainly has its advantages, being both it can be a US based company, but it was still focused on the Japanese market. I think Microsoft saw that as a good opportunity to, grab some of the market at the time.
Mhm.
But yeah, I just hope, you know, I'm sure they're looking at the video game market and
Yeah.
they're seeing what's going on, and I understand they want to be in a niche market, and iOS, even though it's huge, it is a huge market, but like comparatively in terms of small RPG experiences that are a la carte, you don't see much of that
Yeah.
on mobile devices. So good for them. Trying to just chase those smaller projects. And it's also interesting. I was going through some of their previous games. They love to co-develop
Mhm.
with other they had a lot of help on basically all of their games except for some mobile games, with other smaller Japanese game developers, which is, I thought that was kind of cool to see. Even their latest one is with a developer named Arzest, and they also co-developed Sonic Superstars.
Yeah.
Arzest did that one with the Sonic team, so it's cool to hear that lots of
Yeah.
collaboration involved with them too.
Mhm. Yeah, like yeah, like it's just a really interesting story to think about. And again, like Sakaguchi-san just loves making games so much that even with their smaller games, like whenever you read an interview with him, he always talks about how excited he is about making whatever his next game is, because
Oh, good for him.
he just
Yeah.
loves making games, even though he's been making games forever. So it's just like a lot of people, like when you read the history about a lot of role-playing game developers. You just get to hear some of the higher up people kind of feel like they're getting jaded with making games, or they just want to kind of get out of making games in a lot of way, but not Sakaguchi. Like Sakaguchi is just like, keep me in the trenches. I just want to stay there. So he's kind of like an inspirational figure. I like kind of his attitude when it comes to video games,
for sure.
He talks about video
Good
games.
for him.
I mean, he also has some questionable comments that I won't get into here. Like when hearing him talk about the direction that Final Fantasy is going in now. But at the same time, you know, he's the creator of the series. I mean, I can totally expect what he would say about certain things.
Yeah, I mean, he can respond however he wants to respond. He's just, it's not gonna do anything that much. So
yeah. I also love too, like there was like he was talking about in a recent interview, talking about some of Uematsu's newest music for some of the Square Enix's new titles, and he's just like, some of this music just brought tears to his eyes because of how much he just, you know, he had the bromance with Uematsu for the longest time too, which of course is one of my favorite, you know, video game composers. So you'd love to see it.
So I was checking on my phone. I guess the Terra series is only Japanese only.
Yeah.
Okay, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and a lot of those games too, just even if you installed them today, Garrett, most of the time you probably wouldn't be able to go back and play some of them anyways.
Yeah,
that's the thing with mobile games, is that a lot of times they cut once you get past a certain version, they cut off support. Yeah, and you can't play them anymore.
That sucks.
Too bad. Yeah. But anyways, Garrett, we're not done with this topic yet, because we're gonna party up with the community. We got a couple questions from the community tonight about Mistwalker. We're gonna start with Blaze Knight, who says, way, and he does way in capital letters, way back in the day, I played the Blue Dragon demo, and it gave me access to every single spell in the game, or at least what I perceived to be the full list. And it was an extensive list. I don't think it was every single spell, but it was almost every single spell in the entire game. Blaze Knight is correct about this. That made me feel like, why should I even bother playing this game when all these spells are already spoiled for me? So my question is, what's the best way to do an RPG demo? Just the beginning of the game, like Octopath Traveler, the middle of the game, like Bravely Default 2, or more like Blue Dragon that showcases the full scale of the spell list? So we've talked about this on the show before, Garrett, but I feel like my favorite role-playing game demos are honestly just the ones where it's the first couple hours of the game, and then you just pick up your save from there. But it's always on a case-by-case basis, because if your beginning of your game is really boring, you probably don't want that to be your demo, because that's just going to turn people off from the game. It's part of the reason why I got turned off by Blue Dragon, because it was a very slow-moving demo that I just wasn't excited about, and I just wasn't into it. But to Blaze Knight's point, I like when games allow some mystery and where the demo doesn't spoil everything, like Blue Dragon kind of does. So I can see from his perspective about that. But what do you think about this question, Garrett?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm with you. It's a case by case basis, but I want, okay, so for the demo for first couple hours or whatever, I like that generally. When it's like close to release, like maybe a week before, and then just have it go. If you are wanting to release a demo, let's say 6 months before, 3 to 6 months before, I want something more in the middle. I want something like, give me like an hour, not like 4 or 5 hours. Just give me an hour of showcasing what you got.
So maybe if I might compare it to a real life example, like maybe something like the Triangle Strategy demo.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting how Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy does, because they do these kind of very temporary demos, but it's really for them to go back and have feedback and see what they can, I wouldn't say like improve upon, what they can tweak.
Yeah, we saw that with Triangle Strategy in particular.
Yeah,
like that one they talked about multiple times, saying, thank God we released that demo, because we fixed a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, that's true. So I like something like that. I don't really get the whole, I don't think I've really seen this in a demo of having everything and then just going through and being a badass or whatever with all your spells and skills and whatnot.
Yeah,
So
you kind of had that a little bit with the Final Fantasy 16 demo because they had what was referred to as the
I didn't
Icon
play that one
Challenge.
actually. Yeah. Okay.
Because the first part of the demo, Garrett, was like basically the first 2 hours of Final Fantasy 16. But
Okay.
then when you beat that, you unlocked the Icon Challenge, which took place right when you fought Garuda in the game.
I see. Yeah.
But which isn't too much of a spoiler itself to learn that you fight Garuda because it was all over the trailers. But what was a spoiler was the fact that you had access to almost all the icon powers in the
I
game
see.
at that point,
Wow.
and you could
At
switch
that
them
point.
out. Yeah.
Wow.
So it did spoil some of the different abilities that you'd get, like that your starting build started with Titan and Garuda and Ifrit.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting to
So
hear.
you could
Okay.
try all of them out because they wanted people to try out the combat, but they wanted you to try it out with switching between multiple icons. So that's I can understand the thought process of putting that in the demo, but that's the closest thing I can actually think of to compare it to Blaze Knight's point about spoiling it with a bunch of different abilities and things like that, like late game stuff. But
Yeah. That's I feel like that's harder for developers to do
mhm,
than
yeah.
just, release the first couple hours. I again, yeah, I think I just like more, let's put it in the middle somewhere to just
Mhm,
give you not like a story beat or whatever, just to showcase you what the combat is and how to go through it after an hour or so, and then
yeah.
just leave it be. And then I don't want, if my demos are not, if the saves are not going to carry over, I don't want it to be so long. Like 2 hours is like my absolute maximum for those kinds of demos. Yeah.
Mhm. All right, next up we got Savoy Prime, who asks a very specific question about Lost Odyssey. I don't know if we'll be able to answer this one. We'll answer it anyways. So what Prime says, do you think the 1,000 Years of Dreams sections of Lost Odyssey would have been served better as actual cutscenes, or were y'all fine with reading them? I mean,
I
I
did
never
not
got to
catch
this section
those.
of the game, and neither did you.
No,
So
no.
unfortunately, Savoy Prime, we weren't able to. But I will say that when this game came out, we weren't getting a ton of games or a ton of RPGs with voice acting at the time. So I
Mm,
would have been much more tolerable for having, these long sections as Savoy Prime's describing of cutscenes with reading than I would have been nowadays. Where nowadays I'm just so much more used to RPGs having full voice acting or having close to full voice acting, that it would have definitely bothered me now if I was playing the game for the first time
mhm,
versus back then. So
mhm.
yeah, I
Yeah, didn't
yeah
touch it.
yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, or I should say we've both played Lost Odyssey, but neither of us are far enough to experience this. I should say.
Yeah.
All right, and the last question. Well, two questions because Marcus O'Neill has two questions. Marcus O'Neill says the timing of this episode is wild. I literally just picked up a physical copy of Blue Dragon last week,
Good
and
for you,
I put
man.
about 15 hours into Lost Odyssey in the spring. Got to get back to it as I very much enjoyed what I played. Shout out to the soundtrack, a real banger. So, two questions from Marcus O'Neill. I've heard that people say that Lost Odyssey was the Final Fantasy 13 that we should have gotten. Curious what you think about that statement. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but
Yeah.
again, I think it's more fair to compare it to Final Fantasy 11 versus Final Fantasy 13. But even then,
Yeah.
yes and no. I actually
I
think,
heard 13's good. Like I'm hearing some voices coming back around on 13.
yeah, especially when you play the later Final Fantasy games, or just when you play modern role playing games, it really puts into perspective the direction they're going with 13. Because a lot of people complained at the time that it was just running down a narrow corridor or running down a
Mm.
hallway or running in a straight line to places, even if you're outside, where you
Have you
didn't have
played
a ton of
16?
exactly. Well, exactly. Or just modern
Yeah,
games in general. A lot of
that's true.
modern linear games are like that. Until
Yeah,
eventually
for
when you
sure.
get to a certain point in the game where you can kind of explore at your own pace, like explore the world and stuff like that. Like that's what they do in 13, which is again, it was a big turnoff for people when it came out, but nowadays that's more acceptable. So,
Mhm.
because I also have really come around on 13, where I didn't really like it as much when it came out either. But replaying it nowadays, especially on Xbox One or Series X, like, good God, that game is really beautiful nowadays. It still holds up really well. In fact, it's way better of a game than I gave it credit for back in the day.
Oh, Lost Odyssey, right? Is that what you're saying? Or Final
No,
Fantasy?
Final Fantasy 13.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, I heard 13 looks really good now
Yeah.
with the back compat stuff. So really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, and same with Lost Odyssey. I mean,
that's
I
true.
could say all the same things about Lost Odyssey, which is why, like, I think it's accurate to say it's the true Final Fantasy 11 is what I would say.
Yeah.
Just because, again, because of what we talked about earlier, because of the diverging path away from turn base.
It has some huge Final Fantasy 10 energy, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Just not again, not like with the world building or whatever, but just the format
Yeah.
of this game.
That's what I mean. Like, it feels more like a true evolution of what Final Fantasy 10 was versus like going past Final Fantasy 12. Right.
Yes.
Because Final Fantasy 12 way the heck different.
12
I almost swore there.
It went so MMO like passive route. So there you go.
The story's really good in 12, but man, the combat was very different. And then second question, I personally have a real fondness for RPGs of this era. What features of RPGs from this era are you happy are gone or wish you saw in more modern RPGs? One of the features that I'm glad it's gone from some of these older games, Garrett, is the idea of having to talk to every single person in town to figure out where you're supposed to go next, and then the game not telling you or pointing you in any direction other than reading the dialogue and hoping you decipher it from the dialogue. Because I just sometimes it just really leads you to getting lost unless you really pay attention to everything every NPC says. But that becomes tedious after a while, I find, because a lot of times NPCs have nothing interesting to say. So you kind of tune most of them out, and then you, of course, accidentally tune out the one section you actually needed. Kind of like the time you told me you got lost in Golden Sun.
I get lost in Golden Sun like so much.
Yeah,
it was unbelievable how, and even I was lost when I was reading the instructions, when I was reading the guide, I was still lost. I think I need a video guide for this game. No joke, just to get through.
So that's one of the things I'm happy is gone. But Garrett, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think what I like now versus earlier is the pacing. Not necessarily of the story, but pacing of battles have gotten so quick over the past. I would say ever since Bravely Default 1, I think Bravely Default 1 set the standard in terms of battle pacing. Is like you can fast forward like 20 times and just go super. I think maybe some older RPGs did that, but Lost Odyssey did not. At least how much I've played of it, it's like, all right, let's see this animation.
Well, that's why they put that little action element into the combat, Garrett, where you got to press the button at the right time.
Yes, yeah. I went to that part, and I'm like, I see now. They're doing this kind of thing. But yeah, I'm so glad now. I feel like every RPG it has some form of like auto battle or fast pacing system that can get you just along with the story or whatever. So I'm glad that's there. But I wish, Blue Dragon is not really in this conversation to me.
Right.
But the hour count needs to be a little smaller.
Yeah.
On these RPGs. I don't know how long is Lost Odyssey. I don't.
It's also very long. It's like It's 4 weeks, Garrett. It's like 50 to 60 hours long, I think.
Okay, well, excluding these two games that wanted to be unbelievably long at the time, other RPGs at the time were not this long. I would say.
In fact, Garrett, How Long to Beat says 50 hours. Main plus extra 69 hours. Completionist 107 hours for completion.
That's just.
Oh, and that's just the game without the DLC, which is also really long too.
That's insane.
Yeah,
that is insane. Wow. Okay. Well,
make RPGs shorter. That's a good one because, like,
come on,
we've talked about that all the time. Like, actually, I looked it up because I thought it was shorter and I wasn't sure, but the last story is actually pretty short. It's 21 hours for just the main story, and then 26 for main plus extra, and then completion is it's like 40 hours, but.
That's perfect.
That's really good.
That's a good length. 20 hours.
Yeah.
I would pay full price. I would pay $70 for a very high quality 20-hour Japanese role-playing game. I would.
Because we've talked about it. We've talked about it all the time on this show. Like you and I both want to see shorter RPGs. Like I think there's definitely a lot of room for that because again, like the main reason why I feel like Blue Dragon or Lost Odyssey are that long is because there was an expectation at the time where if you made a role-playing game, it had to be long. Because
that's true.
All the popular role-playing games had to be long. So if you were making a role-playing game, you had to make it long, or else people would think there's no value there. Like I remember that in reviews at the time, they would ding your game if it was too short because they're like there wasn't enough value there. Like a good example was something like Heavenly Sword on PlayStation 3. They're like, everything about this game's great, but it's only 6 hours long. We wish it was 10 to 20 hours long. So we're going to give it a 6 out of 10 instead of an 8.
That's rough.
Right? Like that was the mentality back then. And that's also how we ended up with games like Alien Isolation, which, is a game that should have been 8 hours long at the maximum. And it ended up being 20 hours because they had to add all this extra padding to it because they didn't want to get dinged by critics or by players for not adding enough value to the game. So
it makes sense, back in the 90s, why they want to elongate the game. Even the 90s, they didn't have these long RPGs. I would say, when I guess early mid thousands, they started to really ramp up, especially Dragon Quest. And nowadays there's just so much content.
Yeah. Like, well, they got to keep you hooked. It's either a live service game or it's very long. Like that's how a lot of RPGs are now.
But I like to, kind of sample around. Like if a game is 20 hours, I'm more motivated to play and finish that game comparatively to like, oh no, this game is actually 60 hours long. And I was actually going to mention, I was going through Persona Q. that game, so I'm still playing it every now and then. I did not realize how long it is to beat that game. Do you know how long it is, Ryan?
I didn't look it up at all. I just randomly
60
looked
hours.
At it myself. Of course it is.
It's 6 or something crazy like that. And the reason why, when I was like, man, this took a while after the first world. I wonder how long it is to beat. And I looked it up and I'm like, that makes sense because it's so hard. Actually,
I should have probably assigned you a different game because I didn't realize it was even that long, Garrett. I kind of feel bad.
Yeah. We should probably we can still talk about it like after I'm done with the second world or whatever, but like maybe after that, I think I'm kind of good with that game.
Yeah, I think maybe we talk about it later this year, Garrett. We'll
later this year, of course.
But maybe what I do, next week, Garrett, do you want another game instead, a shorter game?
I do want a shorter game. Well, how about
I'll come up with one next. I was just going to say, I'll come up with it for next week and bring you a new game because
that would be great.
There will be reasons why I want Garrett to play a game next week.
But like, give me a one that you really want me to play, and it's very digestible.
Don't say that. I'm looking at the shelf right now, and you know probably what I'm thinking about. Don't tempt me. Don't tempt me, Garrett. I might just do it.
It rhymes with narrative.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Although I'm kind of tempted, Garrett, to make you play a Sega CD game at some point. It's on the list too.
That sounds like an abomination,
Garrett. I'm gonna make this promise to you right now. Yeah. At some point this year, you will play a Sega CD game.
Okay, sounds good.
100%. You will be playing.
There is Shining Force CD.
That game is very, very good. I don't know if you saw my top 30 games of all time list.
Yeah, it's in there. I saw that.
On Twitter. Yeah, it was there. Of course, it's there. Nice. But anyways, Garrett, I think maybe it comes up. Oh, let me see. I can't see any question. When did Bayonetta 1 come out? How does it perform on Xbox Series X versus Switch? So depends on which version of Bayonetta you're playing. Because first of all, Bayonetta came out on the Xbox 360 originally. I think it came out 2012, 2013, if I'm not mistaken.
Quite a ways.
And that game performed pretty well on Xbox 360.
2009, actually.
2009, even earlier. So it performed pretty well on Xbox 360. And the back-compat version is pretty good. There's also a brand new version that came out in 2021 because they did like a 4K version of Bayonetta that released in a 2-pack along with Vanquish, which is a very, very good game.
That's a good game.
If you've never played Vanquish before, very good game. Also very short game. So if you want a short nice, tight, really fun experience. That's good too. There's a bundle for that. And that version also runs really well on Series X. So I actually think like if you're going to play Bayonet on Series X, that would actually be the version I would recommend playing, is that kind of 2-pack version. I haven't played Bayonet on Switch, Garrett, like the first one. I imagine it plays well. Yeah. So
it's great. Yeah, no, I love it. But I can't see. Bayonet is not an RPG. What are you doing?
I mean, no, Garrett, we don't. If the community has questions,
we're gonna slander here.
We will go ahead. We will answer them. But
I understand. Bayonet is a weird one for sure.
Yeah, honestly, I think it plays both. Like it probably plays great on both. 60 frames per second on both. I know the Series X versions, regardless of which one you play, it's 60 locked. So it plays.
It's on Windows. It's on Steam. So.
Yeah, it's on Steam as well. So there's a lot of great options for Bayonetta. So definitely go check it out.
And PS4.
Real. Yeah. It also came to PS4. Yeah. Wii U. It did come. It did come to Wii U on the disc alongside Bayonetta 2. So there you go.
Yes.
All right, Garrett. I think that is going to do it for tonight's show. But before we go, Garrett, plugs go.
You can find me. You can follow me at Twitter at Bland Explosion. I'm not.
Hold on.
Yeah.
What Twitter? I don't know what that is. I only know of X.
Oh my gosh! Wait, so did he actually change this stupid thing? Because the last time
if you go to twitter.com, the X is there. X is going to give it to you.
Unreal. It's not on my phone, but it's on my freaking desktop right now.
They even changed the support page for Twitter now, where it's all X branded. In fact, Garrett, I don't know if you've been keeping up with current events, but if you, it's not called tweeting something anymore. It's exceeding item. Exceeding. XEET is the new term for tweeting.
You can follow me at Twitter at Bland Explosion. I ain't saying anything else. You understand that, okay?
Yeah.
You can also find me on the Discords. I'm becoming more and more active on the PC gaming and Xbox Drive. I also read the Nintendo Drive and PlayStation Drive. I of course RPG Kip. I'm everywhere on the Discord. So just find me out. I will talk to you. And Andrew, congratulations on your Steam Deck purchase. That is the best hardware purchase you've ever made. I promise you that. And I will set you up on all the emulation and outside Steam stuff. Just let me know. So There you go.
Nice. As for me, you can find me over on X at Ryan Turford. You also find us on X at Carpool Gaming, youtube.com/Carpool Gaming, on podcast services around the globe. I couldn't even get a rise out of Garrett when I mentioned that we were on X. That's great. So for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been the 102nd level of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye-bye.